You may be wondering, is a threat not the same thing as an attack? Or what's the difference between an attack and a threat? Or how can I recognize threats in a position? The short answer is just by looking and paying attention. Reality, however, is that sometimes it's hard to recognize threats even if we pay attention. We will answer these questions and learn more about recognizing threats in this session, and how developing this skill is also essential to playing chess well. A quick note before we start. This session is intended for people just starting out, for beginners as well as for players in the 400 to 800 rating over the board rating range. Welcome, chess masters. We're continuing our discussion of the core skills we need to develop to play chess well. We have talked a lot about attacking and guarding capabilities of the chessmen. In short, we learned what an attack is, what the targets of attack are, how to respond to an attack, guard, move to a safe square, capture or counterattack, and very importantly that we want to attack or respond to an attack in a safe manner. We said that by identifying what is attacked helps in determining our options and how to respond to an attack. Now it is a turn to talk about another important skill we want to develop to play chess well, and that is the skill of recognizing threats in a position. To make the transition to the more advanced concept of threat in chess, I want to start with an important clarification on the power capabilities of chessmen. We said an attack is a potential capture. We said that there are three objects of attack: king, enemy pieces, and pawns. And we also mentioned there is a fourth object of attack, namely squares. I said squares can also be attacked or guarded. If you paid attention to our definition of attack and what the fourth object of attack is, then you may have realized something was off. Hey Alberto, if an attack is a potential capture, then how can a square be attacked if squares cannot be captured? Exactly. When it's about squares under the line of fire of pieces or pawns, the squares are controlled rather than attacked, and squares can be occupied rather than captured. Key or weak squares, relevant squares, can be occupied by the controlling piece, usually causing or having a negative impact for the opponent, similar to that of capturing an attacked piece. When we attack an enemy piece, the damage or potential consequence is the elimination of the enemy piece, whereas in the case of controlling a key square, the damage will be caused by occupation of that key square. Note, however, we won't be arrested if we keep using the term attacking or guarding squares, but making this concept clarification was very important as we move forward. For example, in this position, after white played the powerful move Queen e4, white is attacking the unguarded rook and the key squares e6, e7, e8. It's black to move. How should black respond in this position? Black loses no matter where the rook goes. Let me show what happens if the rook goes to b8, c8 or d8. If black plays rook d8, rook b8, white occupies the key square e6 with check, black gets out of check, and now white plays queen d6, simultaneous attack to the king, and the unguarded rook gets out of check, and the queen takes the rook. What happens if black plays rook c8? In that case, it's pretty straightforward. The white queen occupies the key square e6 with simultaneous attack, check to the king and the unguarded rook. King gets out of check, and the queen can take the unguarded rook, check. So that will be another line. What happens if the rook goes to d8 instead after queen e4? Another way to respond is rook d8. In this case, the queen can occupy another one of the key squares, e7, check, king gets out of check, and the queen takes the rook with check. So in these three instances, black ends up losing the unguarded rook, and it shows how powerful it can be, occupying one of the controlled key squares. As an exercise, I will leave you guys with figuring out what happens if the rook goes to each of the squares on the king side, e8, f8, g8, or h8. For each one of those four different moves, try to come up with a move for white that wins. Now let's talk about threats. I will start with the definitions and then a couple of examples. So what is a threat in chess? First, know that attack and threat are not the same thing. An attack is a potential capture, which may not necessarily be a threat. A threat is a potential loss or detriment to our position, whether it's small or big. A move that, if carried out, causes some sort of disadvantage, be it material or positional, that is a threat. Or a move that, if carried out, causes checkmate, that is a threat. An attack and a threat coincide many times during a game, but not always. You may be wondering, do I have to make an attacking move, to create a threat? The answer is no. In this position, for example, some of the threats white can make are not attacks because they would not be a potential capture. In this position, it is white to move, and if white plays rook e1, this move is a threat. Black can stop or respond to this threat by making a move that creates a safe square for the king. So in that case, the threat is stopped or addressed. No longer checkmate. Okay? This move is a threat, but it is not an attack because there is no potential capture. It is just occupying, it is just, as we said earlier, it is just a threat created by the potential occupation of the key square e8. So what other move is a threat for black in this position? White can move rook to d1. this is also a move that creates a threat by occupying the key square d8 on the next move. If black does not respond to this threat or ignores the threat, it may be checkmate. But black can respond to this specific threat, either moving the pawn as earlier or moving the king. In this case, if white executes the threat, the black king can escape this way. It is no longer checkmate. What other move white can make that is a threat? Rook c1. It's also a threat, but it is not an attack because there is no potential capture. It is just the threat of occupying key square c8. Black can respond multiple ways in this case by moving any of the pawns in front of the king to create a safe square for the king, or you can move the king so that it is not checkmate on the next move. So all those moves that white can make would be threats. There is one move, however, and this is one of the last moves that creates a threat. It is not an attack. But there is one move white can make in this position that it is a threat and also an attack. By playing rook a1, white is attacking the rook because there is a potential capture, but also it is a threat because there is a potential loss if black does not respond appropriately to this threat. Black can respond obviously by capturing the attacking piece, and in this case it would be checkmate to the white king. But if black responds in a weak manner, like moving the attacked piece to a safe square, then white automatically has a threat that it can carry out checkmate. Of course, black will not do that. Of course, also white would not do that, but I just wanted to illustrate how in this position there is threats that are not attacks, if that makes sense. Let's have a look at another example, a position we're familiar with. It is black to move. What is the threat in this position? Based on the definition of what a threat is, if white takes e5, does that represent a loss for black? Yes, a pawn in this case. Then the move queen takes e5 is a threat. This threat is also known as immediate threat. The loss would happen on the next move if not addressed. A move like queen h5 poses a threat that is known as threat of first order. Now, what about the intended move bishop c4? Is bishop c4 a threat? Will black lose anything if white plays bishop c4? No. Then the move bishop c4 is not a threat based on the basic definition of what a threat is. However, the move bishop c4 would represent a threat if played. The f7 pawn would be attacked twice and only guarded once by the king. After the move queen h5, the intended bishop c4 is threatened to threaten something. In simple terms, and for easy understanding, bishop c4 is an upcoming threat. A potential move like bishop c4 in this example poses a threat known as threat of second order. Do you guys remember what my opponent said about his intention really was in this position? He was attacking my unguarded pawn, but his intention also was checkmating my king. So what does this all mean? Should I guard e5 or should I guard f7? We have to watch out for both, but typically we must address the more immediate one first, or the more dangerous one, or the more urgent. In the What is Attacked lab video, I said that in this position queen e7 was not as good, but that I liked it. It wasn't as good because it blocks the dark square bishop from development, but I liked it because it anticipates the upcoming threat bishop c4. It guards the pawn on f7. In that case, if our opponent decides to play the intended bishop c4, we can play a counter-attacking move, knight f6, counter-attacking the white queen. And we would not lose the e5 pawn because it is guarded by the queen. That is the reason why I liked queen e7. As you can see, in this position, just to summarize, there is two threats, one immediate threat and one upcoming threat. In this position, white is threatening the immediate queen takes e5 check. And it is also threatening bishop c4, which would in turn threaten checkmate if the white queen takes on f7. So I'm gonna leave you guys with a test position. This is a position you are already familiar with. It is black to move, and the question is, what is the threat in this position? Give it a look and leave your answers in the comments. Now let's have a look at some important threats that can occur in a game, so you know about them. One very important threat we must watch out for all the time is the mate threat, especially the immediate mate threat, or the threat of threatening mate, especially the one that cannot be stopped. In other terms, it is known as an upcoming mate threat that cannot be stopped. Next in the list of threats we want to watch out for is the immediate threats and upcoming threats that aren't checkmate. Loss of material is at our level very typical when we are facing threats, and if we don't address those, we would lose significant material. But there can be threats that are positional threats as well. Like Dan Heisman says in his book, Looking for Trouble, and I am quoting here, "A threat does not have to be a checkmate or outright win of material. It could be other compensations such as king unable to castle, winning the bishop pair, ruining the opponent's pawn structure for no compensation, etc. In other cases, the threat may be positional or long-term, not just the next move, such as the threat of pushing connected passed pawns in the endgame." End quote. Moving on to another important element regarding threats. So we have talked a lot about what are some of the important threats we must watch out for. But you may be wondering, do I have to respond to threats? Let's discuss that. In case you are asking, do I have to respond to threats? The short answer is, if you don't want to lose material or you don't want to fall into disadvantage, yes, typically you would respond to threats made by your opponent. But it is not mandatory by the rules of the game. It is up to you. You may decide to pose a bigger threat or make more dangerous threats to your opponent's position, if possible or available. For example, my opponent attacks my queen with a knight and threatens to capture my queen on his next move. In that situation, I can move my queen to a safe square to avoid significant material loss, if possible, or I can ignore his threat, quote unquote, ignore his threat, and instead of moving my queen, I make a move that threatens checkmating his king. In that situation, my checkmate threat is more forceful than his threat to capture the queen, because the checkmate loss is a bigger or higher loss than losing the queen. Now I am going to move on to another important question. What should we do when there is multiple threats in the position? Let's have a look. When there are multiple strong threats in the position, depending on the situation, you may need to prioritize and address the threat that causes the bigger loss first, if possible. To help you recognize threats in a position, here is my guideline when there are multiple strong threats present. The threat is the one that will cause the biggest damage. Let me now summarize what we have discussed in this session. Threats are an integral part of the game of chess. Like attacks, threats in the position happen both ways, yours as well as your opponent's, and similarly also determine what moves we should consider among our options. We want to recognize them, identify them, prioritize them, and address them to our convenience. Let me zoom out and tell you a few important things before closing out this session. What we notice or discover on the board regarding attacks and threats, and whatever our opponent discovers or notices may not be the same, and what the board is telling can be completely different to either player's reading of the position. Here is a very simple suggestion on how to proceed when you are identifying or recognizing threats and attacks in your own game. Address or stop your opponent's attacks or threats first. Then continue or carry out your own attacks or threats second. I hope you found this discussion helpful in learning how to play chess. With that, I want to thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share with friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. If you are in the US, please visit my Herbalife distributor website to order your favorite Formula 1 nutritional shake mix or herbal tea for a healthier lifestyle. Good luck on your next games and never stop learning. Take care.